chapter, where we are looking at dealing with death and bereavement. So, we have 15 pages to cover today and 15 on Wednesday. Gonna spend a little bit of time on this page looking at the intertwined aspects of death. We are looking at all these categories or all of these aspects. So, of course, the biological fact of death is just that. Nobody lives forever. Biologically, our body does decline in such a way over time, even for the very healthiest people, so that even if someone lives as long as 117, I mentioned that age because it was either 117 or 118. A woman within the last month, I think, month or 6 weeks, passed away in Italy. She was probably 118. But obviously she's what they call an outlier. Most people don't live that long, but she, in spite of the good genes and I would assume good behavior that kept her alive as long as it did, the biological fact is nobody lives forever. Second point, the social and cultural aspects of death. So I'm going to be asking some people, just a second here, I'm going to be asking some of you to talk about how one's social status or social place might have, what might that have to do with how their death is handled. And to give you a little bit of a clue, if one's social status is so high that they would have a state kind of funeral, that is a lying in state kind of funeral, so maybe some king or queen or, high government official here in the United States, or well-renowned person such as Martin Luther King, and those kinds of very high-level status people. What ways is that kind of a funeral or that kind of a person's, what can I call it? Not last rites, but person's, the commemoration of that person's life. How is it different from yours or mine? I'm going to start here in the room where I am with Sally. What might be different in the social handling of that?
I think the higher social status, dealing with death, you're more honored. For example, like Martin Luther King and Princess Diana.
Yes.
It was publicized and everybody celebrated their memories when they were living.
Right.
Whereas someone with a low social status, it would be more private and personal.
Right. Indeed, so far, so good, very correct. So, another thing goes into the social aspect, whether one is, especially if one is just the normal citizen like you or I. How does the family factor into dealing with grandma or granddad's death? if it's a strong, cohesive family, Jeff in Wellington, if it's a strong, cohesive family, how might the handling of the situation be different from a family that is at odds with one another?
Well, that can affect the whole process, I guess, because depending on what the family's fighting about, if it's a family that's not well put together, that could depend on how they handle the body, how they handle the funeral. Like, say if one family member is religious, one's not, they could argue whether a priest should do it or not, or they should be arguing whether it should be cremated or buried, or and then there's the whole inheritance thing. A strong family isn't going to really care about that, whereas a family that's a little more agitated with each other can get really petty with that sort of stuff.
Perfect. Thank you. So, continuing on the topic of family, and you can let go of your button. I'm going to pick on somebody else now. But speaking of family, your answers have been perfect. What about the aged person who is now maybe in hospice, but the person didn't live a very good life and affected the family deeply? Amy in Wellington, how might that be different from the loss of a beloved grandma or grandfather?
I would imagine it would be, I guess, someone that caused turmoil in the family. They may just want to go through the practices and then go through the burial practices and get it over with, and no fuss, just put it behind them as quickly as possible.
Right. Speaking of that, and that's very correct, it brought to mind an individual that I know who has always said to his family mostly, and to some friends, because he said it to me as well, he didn't want a funeral. B, he just wanted to be put in a pine box, no expensive coffins and such. Zach, if a person in your family that the family loves, it's not that the person's a bad person, so it's not about, that. But the person just has his or her wishes. Would you say the family should comply with those wishes, or go ahead and have a funeral anyway, go ahead and get a coffin anyway? I mean, what do you think?
I'd have to think they should comply with those wishes, because that's like you're basically honoring the death. So I think you should do what they always wanted to do. Okay.
With that said, and I'm sticking with you for a follow-up, with that said, what would you think if the family said exactly what you said? Let's comply with what John wants, and so they don't do funeral, they don't do coffin. But what if they were to say, in order to make us feel like we're giving him the honor that we think he deserves, maybe we could later on have a memorial service? What do you think about that?
I'd have to say that wouldn't be bad, just as long as you did what she wants, but at the same time, it would still make her happy that you guys are having like a memorial and stuff. Okay, all right. So far, so good. Continuing or going back so that the screen gets pulled back up. I'm not sure if you guys can see it until I do this. Okay, so social is half of what bullet point 2 is covering. Cultural is the other part of it. So, different cultures do different things. So that I don't necessarily tell any one of you or all of you what you may already know. Amy at midpoint, Autumn at midpoint.
what is a way among several that a certain culture may utilize in the person, let's say the person has died. What approach do some cultures use with regard to taking care of the body? How do they, I don't want to say dispose of, that sounds horrible, but how do they take care of the final work of handling the body, if that even makes sense? What do you think, Autumn? Autumn at Midpoint, can you hear me? Well, I'm not even sure. I think she's in the room, but I can't tell. Okay, Autumn at Wellington, same question. If you can think of some cultures do certain things with the deceased, if that helps, what do you think?
Some cultures probably don't do anything with their bodies, and like America, we try to preserve it, put it in a coffin, and then there's like Egypt that mummifies. Right. And speaking, Autumn, of mummification, what is the more modern derivative of mummifying? It's not mummifying, but it's derived out of that is done around the world, but certainly here in America for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Amy, what do you think?
I'm really not clear on your exact question that you're asking.
So I actually picked this up from the book. So, mummification in Egypt. But the book went on to talk about more current times, something that came out of mummification is now done that's for the same purpose. The purpose of mummification was to preserve the body.
Are you referring to embalming?
I am. Yes, thank you. That's exactly correct. So, embalming, mummifying, two answers. Another answer could be given, so I'm going to call on you, Zach. What is another thing that is done? If not mummifying, if not embalming, what else could it be?
Are we still talking about, like, preserve the body and stuff?
Yeah, or preserve is not what I'm necessarily talking about. There is something that some cultures do with the deceased, but it's not always preserving. And I don't want to give you more hints.
Is it cremation?
Yes, there you go. Cremation is a cultural practice amongst some people. But it may not always be cultural. It may just be personal preference that the person has said, I want to be cremated. So anybody out of any group, any people group, might choose to do that. So those are at least some answers that I was looking for. Speaking of, and this is nothing to do with what's in the book, but I think you will find it interesting. You've all heard of a few terms, such as the term wake. You've heard of the term saved by the bell. You've heard of the term dead ringer. Now, hold on here. And the term graveyard shift. So, those are, I think, some interesting terms as to where they originated from. Has anybody heard what the origin of the word wake is. Okay, either you haven't or you don't want to push your button, whichever the case may be. So, the word wake is a word that is said to originate from the fact that back in the day, before everybody utilized a funeral home, or before funeral homes existed or morticians existed, a elderly person in the home would die, because there were no nursing homes back then, and the elderly stayed with you. Okay, so when the person died, the family members who were used to handling their own deceased laid the person out and did certain things with the body in terms of anointing it or trying to administer certain oils and such like that were meant to preserve it for at least a bit of time until the funeral could happen. Now, the body that's laid out, there would be shifts of people who took a shift, whether it was X number of hours, and all night long, people were assigned to stay awake to make sure the person was actually dead and maybe not in a coma. So that's awake. That's where the word originated from. Had anybody heard that before? Let me see a show of hands if anybody. Okay, nobody had heard that before. The phrase dead ringer. Dead ringer is a phrase that, again, way back in history, when people weren't being embalmed, but they were assumed to be dead, the family wanted to make sure that the person wasn't just in a deep coma. So this dead ringer idea came from the fact that upon discovering back in the 1500s, when they had run out of places to bury the dead, and so they would have to exhume bodies that had been there long enough to be nothing left but skeletons, and they would take the bones out of the coffin or box or whatever way they were buried and make room for new burials, new bodies. So when they were digging up these skeletons, they noticed at the top of the boxes, the top of the coffins, whatever, again, they were buried in, were scratch marks, which showed that some people had been prematurely buried, assumed dead, but were only comatose, or some other assumption that made people think they were dead. So those scratch marks, which said, oh goodness, this person was trying to get out, caused them to come up with this idea to put with the presumed dead person, put in the box a string that the person could pull, and the string went up through the ground, and the person working the graveyard shift, if that person heard a bell ringing, that was the sign that somebody wasn't dead after all, so going to go in and rescue that person because the bell is ringing. So, saved by the bell. So, graveyard shift, saved by the bell, dead ringer, and wake. So those are just, I thought, interesting things to share with you. Now, moving on to the developmental aspects of death. The developmental aspects of death is simply kind of the same as the biological fact of death. You are only going to develop for X amount of time before there is no more development. It's decline, it's demise, it's death. Historical, we've looked a little bit at a couple of historical things already, such as mummifying, and other than mummification, the process of anointing the body with preservation ointments, oils, that is designed to not only keep the body for as long as it can be kept, but also to kind of hold down the smell of decomposition. It's terrible to talk about, but anyway. Religious, okay. We talked already about some people choosing to cremate, others choosing choosing burial. It's either burial or cremation now. So sometimes that is for religious reasons, but other factors of religiousness with regard to death is the belief in having a service performed by a member of the clergy and to say words of graciousness and honor to the deceased. And finally, if the deceased believed in an afterlife, that's why they would be having a funeral in the first place. I suppose there are people who have funerals that didn't believe in an afterlife, and I'm not sure whether they would even choose a clergy to handle it, or dictate that just my friends gather around and whoever wants to say something about me, that's what I want. I mean, I don't know. But for religious people, they do want a member of the clergy to say good things and to give the family hope that that person is going to the better afterlife, not the worse afterlife. Of course, some people only believe in the better, and some people don't believe in the worse. So again, it's all based upon one's religious belief system, one's faith system. Okay, legally, there's all kinds of things where I mentioned earlier there are some families that are cohesive and cooperative, and other families that are at odds with one another. So that's where this legal thing is going to really show up big time, because grandma or granddad left a will, let's say, and that's the best case scenario, because some don't, and then you really have problems then. But let's say they were smart enough to leave a will, and they said so-and-so goes to so-and-so, and the family, if they're cooperative and cohesive, are going to simply accept that, and that's that, and we're grateful for Granddad for itemizing it to make it easy on us. But if Grandma and Granddad weren't really wise enough to do that, even a cohesive family can run into some problems, because the cohesive, no matter that they are cohesive, no matter that they are cooperative, they're going to potentially have some little squabbles about what would Granddad have wanted if he had written a will for us.
So how should we work this? And then they have to go through the court system, because the person who dies without a will, the legal term is that they died intestate. So an elderly, or anybody, whatever age, but an elderly person in this case dies intestate, then it's got to go through the court, and then there is some amount of money out of Grandpa's estate that goes to pay for the court to figure out who gets what. So those of you who have grandparents, you might want to lovingly talk to them about the wisdom of writing a will. And writing a will, as well as, for that matter, doing what my mother did, I will just share with you. She asked me a few years before she passed away if I would come with her to set up her funeral arrangements at this particular funeral home, and we did. And so when she did pass away, that was all taken care of, and it was a wise thing to do. And I have plans to do that myself, so as to take potential burdens off my children, and neither she nor I will feel like that's a morbid thing to do. It's a wise thing to do. It's a freeing thing to do. It's not like somehow hastening my demise by planning my funeral. No, it's just a wise business thing to just get it taken care of. Now I keep living, I keep moving on, I keep enjoying my life. So that's another thing for those of you with grandparents, or depending on your age, maybe your parents are in this age range now, to just gently, lovingly talk to them about the wisdom of two things, of drawing their will up and of making their funeral arrangements, so that it frees them up to live in peace and joy. Psychological is the next bullet point. And psychologically, death certainly affects us. And we're going to look at the psychological more in the next page or so I won't say a whole lot about that at the moment. And finally, medical and ethical aspects of death. All right, so Grandpa, Grandma is in hospice care, and their organs are shutting down, and the loving family member or members or spouse hate so badly to be losing their loved one. So maybe they will say to the doctor, or the doctor may offer, we can put this person on life support or not. It's your choice. Now, the two things I already talked to you about, lovingly having a conversation about a will, conversation about funeral arrangements. Actually, there's a third thing. You need to find out, do they want a DNR? Do they want a do not resuscitate? Do they, want to be put on life support? They either want a DNR, a do not resuscitate, or they want to be given a chance to keep the heart going and the brain going. So those are some medical and ethical. Is it ethical? I mean, it's up to you as a family to decide if it's ethical to hook Grandma up to machines where she's in a PVS, a persistent vegetative state. Is that really ethical? What benefit is that doing to her? Is she actually alive? Well, yeah, the heart's still beating because the machines are making sure of that, and the brain waves maybe are still going, but it's just stuff for the family to think through about the ethicality of
of doing certain things. Okay. So we are going to get to what I said in a moment, but it's not just yet. So looking at this page where we're looking at the Mortality Revolution, with better health care, death became increasingly a phenomenon of late adulthood. So that's true these days. Back in the day, 100 years ago, people weren't expected to live beyond 50-something, 60-something. Hundreds of years ago, go back to about the 1500s, people weren't expected to live much longer than about 18. Life was rough. Medicine wasn't available. Diseases were in abundance, and so, you know, it was just the way it was. But the bullet point points out that now it's a phenomenon of late adulthood. And by the way, late adulthood is getting to be later and later because people are living longer and longer. People used to be, even in my time here on this planet, people as young as 40, 45 were old looking. But now someone who's 40 or 45 is, quite frankly, still a youngster. In the process, it has become invisible and abstract. Death has become invisible and abstract. It's not happening as young, and it's happening in more private settings, nursing homes or hospice or palliative care places designed to lovingly, professionally take care of the last weeks, months, whatever it may be, of grandma or grandpa's life. It's out of sight. It's abstract. Third bullet point tells you that today, violence, drug abuse, and natural disasters have made it harder to deny the reality of death. So, it's kind of speaking out of both sides of its mouth, this particular page is, by saying that, death is happening later and it's more, invisible and more abstract. True. But on the other hand, and at the same time, it's happening with much younger people based upon the things listed: violence, drug abuse, natural disasters. So death is happening all the time, let alone, well, I shouldn't say let alone, because the word violence covers what I'm about to talk about. I mean, there's hardly a day anymore that we don't hear on the news yet another shooting. And there was yet another shooting that I heard about on this morning's news, I believe it was, or else it was last night's news, where, I think 14 people were shot, and the shooter got killed by the police, but 14 people were wounded. Okay, this last bullet point, the term thanatology, is a study of dying. It's a study of dying and of death itself. That's thanatology. Okay, hospice care of the dying. Focus is on making grandma and grandpa feel as comfortable as possible. It's palliative care. Okay? Giving them peace, dignity. Family members can certainly be at their side, and hopefully are, but
at points in time where the family member maybe has to go home for some reason and return in a while, they are in a setting, a professional setting, where they are being taken care of in peace and dignity. Okay, facing death and loss. The terminal decline, the terminal drop, also known as the terminal decline, is indeed the slow but sure shutting down of the organs. Slowly but surely, the organs are shutting down. A widely observed decline in cognitive abilities also. So, the brain is an organ, so just as the other organs are shutting down, the brain is also losing its ability to think very clearly at all. The person is disconnecting from this world, and for those, again, who are people of faith, I don't know about any of you if you've witnessed this or not, but I witnessed it with my mother. Even though she was disconnecting from this world and was weak as weak could be, she had this unexplainable ability or strength to raise her right arm, just raise it, and she was looking in a upward direction, and it was as though she was in less communication with this world and in greater and greater communication with the next world and with the God she believes in. So, this phrase, the next phrase about predicting death as much as 11 years later. So, this means that this whole terminal decline, this terminal drop, doesn't necessarily happen only in hospice, only in the last days or weeks of one's life. What in the world happened? I didn't even do that. Let me get this back where it should go. Something's happening here. Never had it just jump like that without me doing a thing to it. Okay, what this is trying to tell you is that if Grandma and Grandpa, if you've begun to notice, some level of senility, some level of dementia, it may not be Alzheimer's, but the forgetfulness is becoming quite pronounced. What this is basically telling you is, when you notice that pronounced difference, I mean, not just the occasional forgetfulness, we all do that, but it becomes quite regular, quite frequent. This is a predictor that when you notice that, it has been shown that as much as 11 years later after that, so say Granddaddy had this decline at age 70 where it was quite noticeable, it's a predictor that perhaps around age 81 could be when he could pass on. I mean, that's for some reason what the scientific research has discovered. And finally, depression. So the terminal drop is for some, but not all, elderly who are, losing functioning. Some of them, it is a depressing thing. Others, it's not. And let me tie in some things not you and I, but things that you have learned recently in this class. You remember learning about how Grandma and Grandpa are either in ego integrity
or in despair. Well, the grandma and grandpa who are in ego integrity are less likely to be depressed than the grandma and grandpa in despair when they are facing death. Because most likely the ego-integrated elderly have something to look forward to, where the despairing elderly think that this is it, and so I'm just miserable. So, okay. So, looking at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief is really what the full title is. So, her stages of grief include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So, denial is, they give the example of the sentence, "This can't be happening to me." And denial can be both in grandma or granddad's mindset, but it can also be in the family members' mindsets. They're in denial. Maybe those are the family members who would be most inclined to say, yes, hook grandpa up to the machines, because maybe he'll just come back to us. Maybe he'll be okay. Hanging on to hope. I mean, that's the denial. Anger, why is this happening to me, says grandpa or grandma, or says the family member, why is this happening to her or him? I've had so much fun in my life with grandma, with granddad. I'm mad. I'm mad at God. I'm mad at whatever it is that they choose to be mad at. But there's that stage of anger. Bargaining is the next stage. So they've moved beyond denying it. They've had to realize denying it really doesn't make it go away. Being angry doesn't help it go away, and I don't know why this is happening. Jeez, oh man, what is wrong? So, bargaining, because denying doesn't work, being angry all the time doesn't work. Bargaining is, if a person is praying or they don't maybe pray, they somehow try to make a bargain with themselves. I don't know what they would bargain with, but for extra time. Please let grandma stay. I don't want to lose her. If only I can something. Making a bargain, and if it is a prayer, if you only let granddad stay with me, with us, with the family, I'll be a better person. I'll pay more attention to what he has been trying to tell me I should be or I should do. I'm gonna do it. Just please don't take him away. Whatever the bargain might be. Then after bargaining, it's depression. So I prayed and my prayer doesn't seem to be getting answered because grandpa isn't getting any better. So I'm depressed. I'm just miserable. But then, okay, you can be miserable for X amount of time, but how's that working for you? So finally, you get to the last place, and that's the place of accepting it. I had a good life with granddad, and if you believe that you will see him again, then that's something to hold on to. I accept the fact that nobody lives forever. Okay. Now that I want it to go to the next one, let's see if it does. Okay. Bereavement and grief. Bereavement, the difference between the two is what this is pointing out. So bereavement is the process of adjusting to the loss of someone close, whereas grief is the emotional response experienced in the early phase of bereavement. So back in the day, let's say a woman lost her husband, an elderly woman lost her husband, and she would wear black for like a year. She would be in bereavement for a year, but she wasn't necessarily in grief for that whole year. In other words, she wasn't necessarily having these constant crying spells for a whole year, but she was still honoring her husband, her late husband, by being in mourning attire, M-O-U-R-N-I-G, not the time of day, but she would be mourning for a year. But she might have been in grief for, a reasonable amount of time, but not as long as an entire year. So, a classic Greek grief work model includes 3 stages. First, there's shock and disbelief. The shock part may or may not always fit all situations. You're not shocked if the demise has taken place over a long span of time. It's been gradual. So when Grandma finally dies, you're not like shocked. Now you would be shocked in the case of another kind of loss that was sudden and unexpected. So at any rate, it may or may not be shock. The disbelief somehow is sort of there, even if it was a long time, gradual diminishing of health. There's something about getting that phone call from the hospital or the nursing home that we're calling to let you know that your grandmother passed away. There's something about that is some level of disbelief. I mean, you expected it, but it's just that departure, that finality thing that's always going to be there. Preoccupation with memory of the deceased. So, yeah. One thing that families often do, perhaps on the day of the funeral, when they're all gathered back in the home of whatever family member they're all gathered in, they sit around and talk and think of things that make them smile about granddad, grandma. They just, that's their focus, is talk. And this is not just the day of the funeral. It goes on for a period of time. And even if the person was a despairing grandparent, which means their life wasn't as upbeat as the ego-integrated grandparent, even so, the family initially puts aside the negative aspects, and they try to think of something from life with that person that is a positive thing to smile about or agree about or what have you. Finally, resolution is the same thing as acceptance. We become resolved to the fact that Grandma we're not gonna see her here on this earth anymore, and that's just the way the circle of life works, So, some grieving patterns. The commonly expected way of grieving, the mourner goes from high to low distress. That's the typical, that's the norm, that's the more prevalent way of grieving. But then there are some who don't have grief. The mourner does not experience distress immediately or later. Going to call on Sally here. Why might a person be absent of grief? What kind of reason might that be?
One might have absent grief maybe because of shock, that they don't want to accept that whoever has passed has passed.
Okay, that could be a reason. Now, the only thing about that, though, is the last word in this point, where it says neither immediately nor later do they. Your example would probably bring it on later, although the shock that you accurately mentioned could forestall it, hold it off, but eventually the shock is going to wear off, and that's when they would grieve. But this absent grief person never grieves. Taylor, Wellington, why would a person never grieve?
Some people just might deal with death easily, or they just might not show it.
Okay. So, they could be grieving, but just not appearing to be grieving. Did I interpret your answer correctly, Taylor?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So, the only thing about that response is they are grieving. They're just good at hiding it. They don't outwardly cry. But that doesn't quite fit absent grief, because absent grief is there is no grief. Show it or don't show it, there isn't any to show. I don't feel sad. So I don't think Damien is there today. Is Damien there?
No.
Okay. Jeffrey, what kind of reason would a person not have grief?
Well, if they don't like the deceased person, I think that could play a part in it.
That's it. There was a reason why this person who is now deceased left such a poor legacy, a negative legacy, that there is nothing to grieve about. The person just wreaked havoc in the lives of the family as well as others. I mean, to give you an example, and this is extreme, but it needs to be to drive this point home, I think absent grief would apply to people like Charles Manson, whenever he dies, Adolf Hitler. I mean, a person who doesn't have a famous name like that, but who just was such a horrible person that just wreaked havoc, brought misery upon themselves, their family, the world, their world. So, I mean, what's to cry about? So that's absent grief. Chronic grief is the mourner remains distressed for a long time. So this person doesn't move beyond it at, say, 3 months. Let's just say 3 months is a normal period. I'm stabbing at that, so I don't have science to back me up, so I could be wrong, but I'm just guessing common sense. So let's say 3 months is a time span that's rational. But this person is still miserable after a year, after 2 years. That person is in chronic grief. Okay. Exploding common grieving myths. So,
one myth that they are pointing to in bullet point 1 here is that some people might think all grief carries depression with it. But the point is telling you that no, that's not true. Not everybody is depressed, even though they are grieving at the loss of their beloved family member, their beloved grandparents, their beloved spouse. But they may not be depressed. Again, why wouldn't they be if they love this person? Because some people who have deep levels of faith don't see anything to grieve about. People with deep levels of faith often don't even call the service that is held. They don't call it a funeral. They call it a homegoing celebration. Okay? So it's less likely to be depressed if one has that mindset, that set of values. Okay, secondly, high distress at the outset does not mean long-term problems are avoided. So, in other words, the myth that is being exploded here is that you could have had some problems with the deceased that you could have worked out while they were still alive. Now you can't. So some of your high distress could be not just because they're gone, but because you are feeling guilt. You are feeling distress within yourself because I didn't make amends with Granddad over that fight we had, or whatever, you know. So the myth basically that they're trying to bust or trying to explode is the myth that says as long as you're grieving, that's allowing you to not have to worry about your guilt. That's not true, because you have to at some point or another work through that guilt. And I'm just pointing that out as one example. There could be other examples why these long-term problems that are mentioned in this bullet point, there's a reason the term or the wording is used, long-term problems. So you have to deal with whatever those long-term situations are. Maybe Granddad, again, I used this example earlier today, maybe he tried to, get some sense into your head about changing the way you live your life. And you didn't listen. And now you have to come to a decision as to whether now you're going to turn over that new leaf, turn that page, do a U-turn, become a better person, perhaps. Okay. Next, not all people need to work through a loss. Well, that's true. Not all people do need to, because you've accepted it. You have appreciated the life you were able to spend with Grandma, and she's a good person and she left a great legacy. So the working through is not really necessary, because things were smooth with the two of you when she was alive. So, you're sad that she's gone, but you don't feel the need to have to work through the same way you do need to work through it if Grandma tried to get you to live a wiser life, a better life, a healthier life, a smarter life, a more well-functioning life, and you didn't pay attention. Well, then you need to work through that, or other kinds of examples. Okay, not all people return to normal quickly. Well, no need to comment much on that, because Not everyone does return quickly to normal. It takes a reasonable amount of time. Not all people can resolve grief and accept loss. And for so many reasons, that's certainly a true statement. Not all people do resolve their grief and accept loss for reasons of, things, loose ends not being tied up, so to speak, before the beloved grandparent died. And so it's going to take you longer to resolve your grief and accept the loss. Or there weren't any problems. Things were just wonderful, and for that reason, you don't have that wonderful grandma to go to and listen to and get hugs from and get birthday gifts from and all the wonderful things she did for you. Well, it's going to take a while to try to move beyond that. Grief therapy. Treatment to help the bereaved cope with their loss. So professional helpers exist to help people work through their grief. Maybe they're sorrowing. Maybe the thing I mentioned a little bit ago about being guilty. Maybe there's hostility because of the negativeness that the deceased left in your life for you to have to deal with. Maybe anger is for that same reason, and so forth. So grief therapy helps individuals work through that. So research in action looks at ambiguous loss. So when loss is not clearly defined and therefore confusing and difficult to resolve. So it's ambiguous if maybe you lost your loving elderly family member, but there was no awareness that the person had cancer, no awareness that the person had some debilitating illness, because maybe they didn't know themselves, or maybe they knew and just kept it hidden from you. But in any event, it kind of feels ambiguous because they just up and die. I went walking with Grandpa yesterday, and today he's not here. So that's kind of an ambiguous, hard to put your finger on it, shocking kind of loss. People who best tolerate ambiguous loss are, again, people of faith, the deeply spiritual, those whose glass is half full all the time anyhow, so they're optimistic by nature. People who can hold two opposite ideas at one time. Two opposite ideas, yeah, I did take that walk yesterday with Grandpa and he's dead today, but I know where Grandpa is now, and I know I'm going to see him again. So that's holding the negative alongside the positive because you're optimistic by nature and you are deeply spiritual, as the first bullet point mentions. Mastery and control are less important. That's a typo, but mastery and control are less important. So the person who, in other words, best tolerates ambiguous loss, unexpected loss, unexplained loss, is a person who's not inclined to think that they have to be in control of it, or they have to have, if they had, just done so-and-so, Grandpa would still be here. Maybe it's my fault because I made him walk too fast. I should have mastered that. Well, a person who realizes you're not really in control, you can't really master everything about life and its circumstances. That is the person who can best tolerate ambiguous loss. Okay, understanding death in childhood. So, if you're a little child and grandpa dies, that child learns that death means grandpa's not going to wake up. It means it's irreversible. You can't be dead one minute and pray like mommy and daddy taught me how to pray and granddaddy will wake up. They learn, no, it doesn't work that way. Universal, they learn that people, no matter where they live, all over planet Earth, die. Therefore, it is inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. And they further learn as a little child, a dead person is non-functional. I saw the saddest thing on TV the other night. I was watching this program where this grown woman who looked to be, I don't know, maybe 50-something, was recalling when she was like 7 years old and her mother was, her father killed her mother, and she happened to see her father carrying mom out to the backyard where he had dug a hole quickly to put her mother in, his wife in. The father assumed the little girl was asleep because this happened in the wee hours of night, but the argument that took place had awakened the daughter, and so she saw daddy putting mommy in this hole. And so I guess she runs out there, and I don't know what crap he told his daughter, but the daughter just kept saying to mommy, wake up, and mommy didn't wake up. So day after day, even though daddy had put dirt over and made it into a permanent grave, until the idiot got caught years later finally. But the point being, she didn't know at her young age that this bullet point is true, that a dead person is non-functional. Mommy can't wake up. Teenagers, on the other hand, look at death in the following ways. In many communities, death is a part of daily life. Other adolescents take heedless risks and end up dead by driving recklessly or experimenting with drugs because they're more concerned with how they live than how long they live. So, they are so young, teenagers are so young, that they kind of, without realizing that they're doing it, they're thinking of themselves as being immortal, invincible. Death just doesn't really cross their radar, so they do risky things. Why is that? It's what you've learned about the fact that your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years old, and the part of the brain that does not fully develop until you're 25 is the frontal lobe and the prefrontal, and that's the part of the brain that has to do with social behavior and making good decisions and good judgments, good conclusions about how to live one's life. So that isn't fully developed, thus the risky behavior. Okay, dear ones, our last class on Wednesday, and I'll be at Wellington that day. See you later.